Around 2 years ago, I ended up actually getting into national news in the Philippines, ladies and gentlemen, when I made one tweet saying, yo, somebody at Team YouTube has to help shut down this account. Now, at the time, it's kind of hard to remember exactly what led to that frustrating tweet. I think there was some level of YouTube moderation that, me and plenty of other people didn't agree with. But there was one person that I saw at the time on YouTube, and it was actually kind of shocking because not too long ago, I actually saw this FBI poster. Now, if you don't know what this poster is, you probably haven't seen the videos where I talk about this weird, creepy religious pastor on the other side of the world, the Philippines. So this is Apollo Quiboloy, and he's gotten into conspiracies to engage in trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion. Trafficking of children, trafficking by force. Now, I saw this guy on Facebook, YouTube, and plenty of sites just openly preaching to a whole bunch of people willing to listen to his stuff. Because if it's one thing that I find really, really scary is it's cases like Epstein, people where, individuals get completely harmed, treated like absolute cattle, and, usually the very rich and powerful that are associated never really actually suffer any real possible consequences. But it gets even scarier when I look at the amount of actual harm that Apollo has done over the course of his religious, tenure. Now, the other thing that really hits me over here, too, is the added component of religion. Now, when it came to Quiboloy's trafficking case, this is where it gets very, very dark. The amount of women that were victimized, at least in the US case, were about 5, of which 3 of these victims were actually minors when the trafficking had began. So this was a very long-term situation. But then when you go to the Filipino investigation, he was suspected of exploiting around 200 different women. The investigators alone believed that there were around 1,000 women targeted, mirroring the biblical story of King Solomon, who had 700 wives and concubines. In fact, even the police had identified about 68 different personalities of various different ages, whom were victims of that sexual exploitation. Now, there was an actual post by the LA Times. This is an article from 2024. Noah Goldberg writes, "It was New Year's Eve, 1999, and Arlene Stone, one of the victims in this piece, was convinced the world was going to end. Jesus Christ was going to come down from a cloud, and she would go to heaven. And that's what Stone said she and other members of the Kingdom of Jesus Christ had been told by their spiritual leader, Apollo Quiboloy, known by his followers as the appointed Son of God. Now, I'm not a Christian man myself, but I know that according to Christians, there's only one Son of God, and he's not currently living with us right now in the Philippines." But that's the thing about religion, right? Sometimes it can take any religious organization. Like, you can convince some of the genuinely smartest people in the world to immediately believe some of the most insane shit just through the power of God in a way, too. And that's where it gets really scary over here, because it wasn't just convincing people by the power of God, it was convincing those same people and then taking direct advantage of them. So how did this actually happen, ladies and gentlemen? What actually occurred with this guy's crazy religion? Now, even though Apollo Quiboloy has basically been targeted by some of the big tech companies, now that his more prominent US designation, like his FBI designation, is pretty much known, he has effectively been kind of silenced. But you can see that 15 years ago, one post from ABC News where they actually did meet up with the man in this 8-minute video shows him as the Son of God. Now, 15 years ago, you could see him on his compound just kind of talking to the ABC reporters, and you can even see, he's got what appears to be one of the most snazziest looking, preaching domes, one could say. I mean, the man is literally getting ready. He's already blinged the absolute hell out for his entire sermons. This is one of those guys where, if you ever actually look carefully at some of those, mega churches in the United States, you can find, pastors that have, private airlines, jets, literally just people that have off of the backs of preaching to their audiences. And, if it's one thing that I've learned in religion, especially organized religion, is that a pastor just should never really be that rich, especially off the backs of their congregations. But again, for a guy in the Philippines, he pretty much had it all. He had an entire compound, one that absolutely stood in stark contrast to the living conditions of the average Filipino. Now, of course, Filipino people pretty much have the best comment in this situation. He writes, "As a Filipino, I feel sorry for the people who believe in him. Your watch could probably feed 100 families for a month. And you know what? If you really were the appointed son of God, I don't think you'd be buying gaudy watches, especially when you're looking at your congregation barely able to feed themselves. Now, of course, I would say that a lot of the reach for Quiboloy kind of died probably around a few years ago. Like, there's still sermons that you can find access to, but they're usually from like a year ago, and they probably are sitting at around like 5,000 views. So, you know, again, it's not as popular as he's ever really been, but it still shows that he's still got a concentrated level of followers that believe anything this man says. Even if you bring the abject truth, which I'm about to do, there will still be believers in this guy's crazy fucking cult. So like many cult leaders, he obviously has his own little Wikipedia-style entry on his own website, Birth and Early Life. Apollo Quiboloy was named after the great mountain, Apo, the Philippines' highest point. And of course, you can see baby cult leader right over here sitting with the other babies. So when he was 14 years old, he experienced his first vision. One night in his bed, he had a dream about the end of the world. It always is the end of the world. You're going to start seeing themes right over here. It's how they get these people into their cult so that they can obviously be saved by the time whenever this end of the world or rapture really comes. He saw a bright star descending from heaven, growing larger and brighter as it got closer to Earth. And as it did, it resolved into the image of the Lord suspended high up in the air, shining bright, blinding as the sun. Down below on Earth, the world was in great pandemonium. People were running in all directions, trying to escape from the fire that was rapidly spreading across the land. In his dream, the gasoline depots near his sister's house were exploding one by one, spreading fire everywhere. People tried to escape via the sea, but even the water was aflame. There was nowhere to go. And of course, throughout all these teachings, Apollo Quiboloy eventually decided to start the Kingdom of Jesus Christ. And of course, if you look back at their real humble beginnings, they really weren't that big of an organization, even back in 2009. They had this compound over here, which still wasn't even entirely done. But of course, as the congregation grew, and as more money started to be formed into the entire circuit, you could see that he started creating this King Dome project over here too, which then eventually grew larger and larger and larger until it became an entire monstrosity right over here. I mean, it's got everything. Now, the watches, the compound, the media company SMNI alone are not small assets. Now, there's no hard and fast understanding of how much money he actually has, but whatever money he does have is obviously pocket-watched by the United States government and the Filipino government, and there's a lot of forfeitures being requested. Because what we're about to discuss here is an incredibly disgusting situation of how he actually allegedly got these ill-gotten, gains. Now, like any cult or any religious organization, you can usually get away with crazy shit as long as you're not raising enough awareness into your activities. But of course, that wasn't exactly how it went down to. So this article from the Philippine Daily Inquirer, where they talked about a cult being probed for disappearance of teeners. A mother's plea to reclaim custody of her daughter from a television evangelist has made a Mindanao-based church ministry the target of an investigation by the city council and government social workers. So Rillian claimed that church founder and leader Apollo Quiboloy has been luring Baguio teenagers and young adults who now refuse to return home after being recruited to man Quiboloy's ministry in Davao City. So the way that apparently they described the trap in this situation was Rillian said that she asked the city council to intervene from these teenagers falling into the trap of a cult that is out to destroy the unity of families. Because again, a whole entire idea of a cult is to take you away from your family, isolate you from the people that love you, the people that can talk sense into you, and then all of a sudden, they now are heavily reliant emotionally, financially onto you. So of course, they say that the church is a scam because it requires members to pay tithes as high as 70,000 in the Filipino currency a month, which obviously is not going towards anything holy. It's probably going towards those gaudy watches, and of course the properties, and of course that fucking unbearable megadome that the guy had built. The way that they also got these children to make more money, allegedly, was that young adults were asked to sell the church products. So things like rice cakes are given a mission to finance the church's 17 radio stations and satellite equipment. So again, that entire media company we were talking about, right? Again, a lot of these things were not meant for the beneficial benefits of like religion in sort of this altruistic sense. It was just building this organization, this like control to an ever nth degree. Now, the other problem with a religion like this is obviously what happens when you start expanding your borders. Religion just doesn't stay in one country. Obviously, if you can siphon money, especially money from, let's say, Americans, people that have the most disposable income, in comparison to the Filipinos, that's where the real money, I guess, is to be made. And that's where, again, I would say that Quiboloy decided to step a little bit further. Now, this guy has effectively been protected by his own country because he's connected to people in the former administration. So he was like the religious advisor to some of the leaders, to a point where, like, obviously, because of his connection to the elite, nobody was ever really going to touch him. And Quiboloy was still not yet large enough as a figure to be a political weapon that the United States could use or, really bring up, or really had an interest, I would say, in to force the Filipinos into actually overcoming some corruption or overcoming whatever, hurdle they had to send this guy over. So going back to the LA Times article, they do describe that the Church of the Kingdom of Jesus Christ opened up in Van Nuys in 1990. So at this point, Quiboloy would actually come to the United States here and there back then in the 90s and, of course, the early 2000s to preach about once or twice a year to those Van Nuys members. Now, of course, ultimately, the big draw for this organization was the amount of money that the Van Nuys organization had brought in through donations. So if you've ever been to like Los Angeles or, well, really any city, one thing you'll notice are people that, are oftentimes, I wouldn't say heckling on the streets, it almost sounds a little rude, but people that, are out there, they're in public, they're showcasing their religion. You ever walk by somebody that's giving you a religious pamphlet or anything of that nature? Sometimes in LA, you'll find people that will sell you something for money. They're obviously trying to raise money for their organization. So the Kingdom of Jesus Christ kind of like bled in and camouflaged themselves pretty much as any other religious organization. Except, obviously, the FBI got a little bit of an interest here, and at one point they actually raided the Van Nuys Church in 2020. On January 29, 2020, a dozen FBI agents were gathered outside the Van Nuys Church with their weapons drawn. They actually arrested numerous members of the Kingdom of Jesus Christ. And federal prosecutors then, after this investigation, decided to accuse them of massive immigration fraud and human trafficking. I could only imagine what this raid and like the responses would look like given the current political climate in the United States when it comes to topics like immigration fraud and, of course, human trafficking. From the official Immigrations and Customs Enforcement press release, there were actually 3 defendants that were charged. Gia Cabactuan, you had Marissa Duenas, and Amanda Estepare. And these were people that were obviously administrating the entire organization. But of course, for Marissa, she would allegedly secure passports that would be used by the workers who would enter the United States under this fraudulent immigration. So where it gets a little bit creepy over here is when you start to see just how large this scale actually had happened. So for instance, if you actually look down into this list, what they had seized were approximately 72 Filipino passports, 7 United States passports, and 1 Ukrainian passport. And of course, a lot of these confiscations would happen, in my opinion, to reduce the amount of movement that one would have. When you don't have information or you don't have your documentation, you're pretty much reliant on these people to keep you financially stable, and again, to have you are just basically stuck in this area, right? So, of course, when they further went into it, immigration records even summarized, and this is from the criminal complaint, there were 82 sham marriages, which obviously were marriages done not because 2 people wanted to get into a union or they were in love with each other. It's because they wanted to provide some level of immigration paperwork to the party that was, seeking to come into the United States, or at least in some cases, allegedly forced to come to the United States. And of course, you can even see it further too, where literally for Duenas, she possessed 4 male wedding rings, 3 female wedding rings in an office. So this was just happening like a factory. The other part of the search that was absolutely a little chilling to me was reading that they actually had a file called Traitor that contained information on the members who decided to flee the church. The traitor part of this got me genuinely worried, so I started to look into how they would actually even enforce this within the church. Now, according to the actual Philippine news agency, according to, again, the Philippine National Police, where it came out to was apparently a few of the victims involved in this were actually scared of speaking out. This is a translation that reads out, "Those whom we talk to fear not only for themselves, their only lives, but also for their family because of the angels of death." So this is apparently an alleged organization that would serve as the armed enforcement wing. And I would imagine they would deal with people that would speak out against the church or maybe even try to leave. So I want to take this opportunity to call on other victims of Pastor Quiboloy, those who have claimed they've been molested, especially the children, to come forward. The government is ready to protect you. You don't have to fear anything. And I can imagine anybody would be scared because, again, given how certain governments, even the biggest in the world, is treating cases like Epstein, I would imagine being a victim is a pretty scary time. Especially when, in this case, the person behind, your victimization is apparently one of the most prominent cult leaders in your country. So, of course, furthermore into it, what I found really interesting, too, was apparently Quiboloy had registered 19 firearms. And even though that he had all these guns, the PNP actually hesitated to label him armed and dangerous, which is, again, just super duper wild, right? Because, again, to go into it, there were senators saying his armed soldiers are active and ready to die for him. So, again, this is stuff that would freak anybody out. It almost sounds like, something you read about in Waco, for crying out loud. But when asked by the actual legal team for Quiboloy, this is hilarious. So apparently the angels of death, according to them, that's not true. They said that they're more described as prayer warriors who he said are dedicated to spiritual battle, not violence. And he said that labeling these guys as a private army is meant to smear the group. So yeah, it's just wild reading their responses, but also kind of getting a glimpse at how enforcement would work behind the scenes. It's a very structured situation, it seems, allegedly in this case. So back in 2021, a federal grand jury said that, again, when it came to this organization, these were the people that were arrested. Quiboloy, which again, who was believed to be 71 at the time, was also an individual who had residences in Calabasas, Las Vegas, and Capole. Now, again, I don't know about Capole. I know a bit about Vegas, but I'll tell you right now, Calabasas is not a cheap place to live in California. So again, for a pastor to just have all these properties around, one has to ask what the primary source of income really is. Is it completely legal? Which again, the further these federal prosecutors went down, didn't really seem that way. But of course, one of the things that really freaks people out here is, again, when it came to the talk of night duty. So what was night duty in this situation? So the designation that you would give to people that were in this church that would basically be his followers, the most devout of which, would be called pastorals. Now this is an excerpt from a court document that you can look up yourself and read that is presented as a superseding indictment by the United States of America. What that would happen was, of course, the pastorals prepared things like his meals, they cleaned his houses, gave him massages using lotion, and then traveled with him on trips throughout the world. Now, the night duty was obviously when these pastorals would have to sleep with Quiboloy on this schedule that would be determined by Quiboloy and one of the administrators. Now, of course, obviously, the scarier thing about this is not just that women are just being forced into it. Obviously, there were some pastorals that absolutely started this duty before the age of 18. Allegedly making Quiboloy a diddler. Not to say that, everything else that he did before wasn't close. This just adds to the complete disgusting nature of this person. And I've never seen a more transparent cult in this case, right? One that's out there for financial enrichment and literally using human beings as cattle. Now, where it shows you where it's really scary, though, is that night duty was basically explained to some of these pastorals as God's will. And actually, it was sold as a privilege. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to deny the appointed Son of God his pleasures or not, right? Are you going to deny this, Jesus reincarnation, anything of that nature? Let's say that you didn't do something. Well, you would be punished. Absolutely. And the other thing is, obviously, to satisfy some of these individuals, not just Quiboloy, but other administrators as well, too, allegedly, they would be given trips to places like Disneyland, flights in private jets, the use of a cell phone, which, obviously we all take for granted, but I mean, goddamn, and monthly payments referred to as honorariums. So literally, it would just be ways to placate these individuals as much as they can. Now, obviously, if you tried running away, you were punished. The way that they gathered money too is like, obviously when they were outside soliciting money for the workers themselves, these quotas, they would be increasing constantly. They would call these things the month of blessings or the nights of harvests. And of course, the workers who would fail to meet these daily solicitations goal, if you were a worker that failed to meet that goal, for instance, right, you'd be punished. You'd be yelled at, shamed, berated, physically abused, or in some cases forced to fast, while being locked in a room at the actual compound. Again, really, really disgusting fucking behavior. I mean, imagine being you have your passports taken away, you're allegedly jailed inside this facility. It is actually a hellish situation to witness. I mean, this is fucking disgusting, and the fact that it happened out in the open is just mind-blowing. Like, this makes me enraged, because the thing about it is, it's like, obviously looking at the amount of time, like, even looking at guys like Epstein, like, that was a really fucked up situation, but this guy is worse than Epstein. Because from what I understand, there's a lot more victims in this situation. There's an element of, again, pimping these people out to gain crazy financial boons, right? If you look at something like the Epstein situation, a key difference is obviously Epstein used his connections with people for blackmail purposes, allegedly in this case, so that he could use that as leverage for decision-making and political plays, or plays in general down the road. But this guy literally existed to take human beings in, send them out on the streets to make money, and then use them sexually. I mean, to him, human beings were just like this multi-purpose machine designed literally for his and his only benefit. That is the really scary part of it. And anytime people even questioned Quiboloy or any of these leadership, what was really insane too was that female victims in these situations would actually, in some cases, allegedly write these commitment letters, literally just designed to defend Quiboloy, in which these victims would devote their lives, alongside their bodies, obviously, to this appointed son of God. It never ended, it just kept going. The amount of abuse was like obviously 24/7, 365 for these people. And this literally just happened in front of everyone. It just happened, in plain sight, really, right? Like this weird little mega church that you never really took too much of notice towards. There was allegedly some really evil stuff happening inside it. And it took years until the FBI and the IC and all these organizations to come in and kind of do their job. And what would happen if you didn't want to do this? Well, you would have apparently the devil inside you. And you don't want to have the devil in you when you're a believer of God. You would risk eternal damnation. I mean, what's one night with Quiboloy versus infinity in hell? Quiboloy would threaten and physically abuse victims who attempted to leave the actual organization or were not available to perform night duty, which, according to the indictment, also alleges Quiboloy would physically abuse victims for communicating with other men or engaging in other behavior that upset him because he considered such conduct adultery and a sin. I mean, you look at organizations like Scientology, and you look at L. Ron Hubbard, and you look at things like the Sea Org and all this stuff, and it blows your mind that you think that this can happen in the United States, right? Like one of the most free countries in the world, and this is just happening, and it also happening in one of the most it's happening literally right next to you. Like, you don't know this kind of stuff is happening around you. Like, even in your state, even in cities as populated as Los Angeles, in states as developed as California, you have no idea what the fuck is happening to you. Like, there is legitimately evil occurring around you, and you just have no idea. You think that it can't happen into you because, as you're raised in the first world in America, you think that everything's fucking fine and perfect, and the cops are always going to be there 100% to stop this stuff. But when you look at how long this has been going on, 2002 allegedly, from there onwards to 2018 at the very latest, and who knows, maybe even up until this guy's arrest, there was shit going on back in the Philippines. This is the kind of stuff that should make your blood boil. And it should make you question everything. And it should make you, more critical of why your government didn't respond to this even faster. Now, because of this, the conspiracy alone for the trafficking, which would carry a statutory maximum penalty of life in a federal prison. And that is where it seems our boy Quiboloy is going to be headed to. So again, before we go into this, it's time to start looking more into how this kind of a fraud actually had occurred. So of course, members in the Philippines were forced to solicit donations on the streets and sell pastries like Krispy Kreme donuts, claiming that they were basically a foundation for children. So again, it's raising money in a fraudulent manner. So federal authorities even said that they raised around like $20 million in the last 5 years. So again, 20 million in 5 years is fucking insane, especially for a church that I'm sure most of you guys watching probably haven't heard of. This is a huge story in the Philippines, but not really in many other places. So basically, they forced these young workers to work incredible hours, and if they didn't perform, they were physically assaulted or beaten. So of course, even the lawyer, Michael Green, who represented the church, had said that all of this testimony is from disgruntled former members who were allowed to stay in the U.S. longer in exchange for their testimony, claiming that the U.S. is kind of like giving these people residential rights just in exchange for going after Quiboloy, which again doesn't really make a lot of sense either. You know, if you look at the history over here, obviously the United States' interest is in preventing their population from being exfiltrated or used for sexual trafficking purposes, first and foremost. Like sometimes, yes, you cannot trust the government, but you also have to understand that the government actually loses a lot more when their people are used like fucking cattle in these processes. So they say they gave visas to family members, your father, your son, and I'm not shocked that out of 6 million people, you wind up with a number who are disgruntled that say bad things. Now, again, 6 million followers, and you're making that much money is, again, just insane. It shows you that a religion doesn't even have to be that massive, especially for a church leader to make crazy fucking buckets of cash. Even Salinas was indicted in 2018 for trying to smuggle $335,000 in cash out of the United States on a plane leased by Quiboloy. I mean, just the brazen level of fucking avoiding the law and committing these crimes is just insane. Like, these people think they could have gotten away with anything. To go back to that LA Times article, one of the things that they said too was when they talked to individuals who were in this church, they would just say, I would go to school, come home to church, solicit, go to sleep, wake up, go to school, solicit, weekends, solicit. The life that this person lived in this time was just there to enrich this fucking sick bastard on the other side of the world who didn't give enough of a shit about this person as a human being. Now, while all of this was happening in America, back home in the Philippines, the money that was coming in was being used to expand this compound that he was at into something even larger than anything. He wanted to turn this into a mega city for his people. So again, one of the big projects that came out was the Kingdom. And obviously, while it's not available to look at now, thank God to the Wayback Machine, you can get an idea of the kind of crazy shit this man wanted to build. He wanted to build an entire area where his congregation could come through, build this monument of sin together. And again, you can see photos of people building this project right over here. And again, the idea was, in my opinion at least, to have the flashiest fucking looking kingdom that any other mega church pastor in the world would absolutely cream over. I mean, it's crazy to think this was right next to the actual international airport. I mean, this guy could have his private jet right there and his office literally right here. I mean, that is just insane to see. I mean, it looks like a stadium right over here. If it literally be fit for like what? Just like a goddamn world leader? I mean, Jesus Christ, this guy thought he was like the goddamn Pope at this point. But of course, all things thankfully come to an end. See, as the political situation in the Philippines started changing around, and a lot of that leadership that he was buddy-buddy up with had changed into a leadership that was far more critical of him, eventually he had actually been served arrest warrants. So at one point, you know, the actual Filipino police had actually raided that same indoor arena we looked at to serve him those arrest papers, to serve him those arrest warrants. To a point where a $100,000 reward or 10 million in, Filipino currency had actually been rewarded for any information leading to Quiboloy. And this became the next big stage, the siege of his actual compound. For 2 weeks, over 2,000 officers had basically surrounded this person's compound. 2,000 police officers. And for 2 weeks, a standoff occurred between the followers of the Kingdom of Jesus Christ and, of course, the Filipino National Police. And of course, obviously, thankfully, after the end of this 2-week standoff, there was actually an arrest that was done. So this scumbag started doing every motion possible to get some leniency, house arrest, all that bullshit. And of course, the law enforcement agencies, for the first time, were actually siding mostly with the people. And those people were given some semblance of justice when this person's motions started to get fucking denied. I mean, it's crazy when the government says, we maintain our stand that it's preposterous for the government to spend resources to secure a fugitive on house arrest when there's just no compelling reason to do so other than the whim of the accused. Absolutely true. True. So what he was facing was a non-bailable qualified human trafficking charge under Section 4A of the Republic Act. But what was actually insane about this story too, and the last time I covered it, what really blew me away was after I talked about it, the scumbag ran for office. He ran for political office. According to his candidacy paperwork, he wants to be part of the solution to the problems of our country. He is running because of God and our beloved Philippines. So according to the election code, candidates can only be disqualified if they have been declared insane or incompetent. Well, I would say both apply here. Or if they have exhausted all appeals for subversion, insurrection, rebellion, or for any offense of which he has been subjected to a penalty of more than 18 months for a crime involving moral turpitude. And I would imagine human trafficking definitely falls into that. But he did still run, and he did actually end up drumming enough votes to get himself up to rank 31 with 5.5 million votes, which shows you that even after everything that can get exposed about this guy, in terms of being a really sick trafficker, alleged, of course, but, governments are definitely hounding him for this. Yeah, of course, people are still going to go into it because people will still believe this man. This guy was on tape saying that he thinks the fucking CIA is about to whack him.
Surveillance ako dito sa Pilipinas ng CIA at ng FBI. Sarili kong bansa, ako po ay nagtatago sapagkat liligwakin ako ng ganun-ganun na lang. Walang extradition process na gagawin. Dumating po sa aming kaalaman sa mga sandaling ito from reliable sources. Correct me if I am wrong, but these are reliable sources na dumating sa akin na ayaw na raw po nila ng extradition treaty. Ang kanila daw pong gagawin ng CIA, ng FBI, ng US Embassy at State Department kasabwat ng ating gobyerno, ng Pangulong Marcos at ng First Lady at kung sino pa man ang nasa gobyerno, ako ay rendition ng kanilang gagawin. Ang rendition, ang ibig sabihin po, anumang oras pwede nilang pasukin ang aking compound at ako ay kidnapin. It's not only rendition but also elimination. If it is possible, pwede nila akong i-assassinate.
The thing is, obviously, there is some level of outlandishness that just goes too far. But it doesn't seem like for, this case, it's far enough for a lot of the people, okay? They're kind of just eating this up. They're eating whatever this man says, and it's scary. So for now, one of the most important things that can kind of happen to him is being extradited to the United States of America to serve for a lot of the court cases that are pending for him here federally. So confirmed by the actual, Filipino ambassador to the United States, apparently, yeah, there was an extradition request sent to the DOJ. Now, extradition is pretty important. Basically, if granted, obviously Apollo will have to go from the Philippines over to the United States, which, if he could have any sway over Filipino prisons, which that kind of doesn't seem like he does, really, in the grand scheme of things, he's going to have to face and live like a pig in complete squalor inside a U.S. prison, if, of course, convicted. Now, even the DOJ, it's kind of questionable because they said no request for that extradition had actually happened. So I don't know who's exactly lying or bullshitting around over here. But if this is true, one of the things that did come out was obviously even, Quiboloy's lawyers were like, guys, maybe it's time to not abide by this. We should let the courts in the Philippines handle it. And of course, I would imagine they would say that because genuinely considering looking at what the US government has dug up into it, I don't think that, their case is unwarranted. It's not a pointless case. And I think that scares the shit out of this cult leader. For over a decade, for 2 decades really, this man has basically just completely profited off of the backs of people, used individuals, allegedly of course, all for their own alleged enrichment. And that, of course, should blow your mind, okay? It should blow your mind because in a normal civilized society, it shouldn't happen. And when you look at the damage and impact done by this, I would say Quiboloy is in some cases Far worse than people like Jeffrey Epstein, okay? He's just one of those individuals that adds the added component of a cult, the insane alleged sexual exploitation. And of course, just this amount of control goes far beyond just like one guy blackmailing the entire elites of the world. That's a bigger story because the elites don't want whatever that information is to come out. This is a much more intense story because Quiboloy has allegedly used tons of these victims for some of the most evil shit. This is the perfect example of an actual evil cult leader, allegedly, of course, existing in the world. And I used alleged a lot because there are no convictions as of yet. Just really strong legal cases that have been murmuring around for years now. But all of this kicking and screaming usually just comes to an end, ladies and gentlemen, because ultimately it really seems like this guy could have gotten away with it, died of old age, if he just didn't get too greedy. Greedy enough to the point that, he pissed off the United States and got onto their radar, and of course, he didn't exactly think what would happen if his enemies, or the people that were against him, suddenly got into power in his own country. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and this is one of the most evil people that I've ever actually seen. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.